Hi, Saori. It's so good to have you on the Everyday Mystic.
Hello, I am so excited to be on. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is going to be such a joy because we were already talking before I hit record and it was already juicy. I'm like, wait, I got to hit record. I know you live in London and you chose this spot specifically because it had a vibe, right? It had wellness vibes through and through. Tell us a little bit more about where you're sitting and your space.
Yes, so I'm based in Woolwich, which is more in southeast London. And I think your point about I chose this place because to me it's actually very soothing. And I do like how in London there's actually a lot of new builds. So, maybe Carissa in your area as well, but basically they're, new apartments and they are very clean and new and modern. But I feel like sometimes it doesn't have character and it seems like they all look the same. And so something that I was looking at for my own place was trying to find something that had more of that authentic feel. And I feel like hopefully that's coming through in what you're seeing right now.
It so is. It so is. And, your company follows these five principles, these wellness principles that come from your heritage, from Japanese culture, and Wabi-Sabi is one of them, right? So that authenticity that you just mentioned of these old buildings and cracks and places that aren't that sleek, perfect, modern look, just this authentic, the wabi-sabi of where there is a feeling that is invoked by something that isn't perfect, but it has character. So what is it about wabi-sabi? Can you define that a little bit more for us? And what do you think it is about it that opens our heart or hits us differently than, let's say, those sleek new modern constructions?
Yes. So wabi sabi is, I always like to define it as nature's way of helping us understand what it means to be authentic. So if we think about nature, it really is the most natural form. And it follows what we say these three main principles. And so nature is imperfect, it is incomplete, and it is impermanent. If we break that down a little bit more, do we say that there is a perfect flower that's one that's perfect over the other? We don't, right? And so it's this idea that it's actually meant to be imperfect nature. And so that's actually helping us understand that we are not meant to be perfect as well. When we say impermanent, we talk about this idea that nature is always moving, it's similar to seasons. And I always think that we also have seasons of life. And it's really important to recognize that. And then lastly, it's incomplete, meaning nature is never done. It always has another day, has another cycle. And I think this is really important for us because in our lives, I know myself, I would be in these traps where saying, when am I going to be done with this journey of healing? Or when am I going to feel like good enough? Uh, and it's these if then statements that can really get us into these traps of feeling that we have to be done or complete. But in a way, that's the beauty of life where we have this journey and we're continuously on this journey and it doesn't end. And so I think Wabi Sabi is a way for us to connect with our authentic selves and even making sure that we're surrounded by the wabi sabi concept and even our surroundings is to me really important because we are reminded that we are meant to be like nature.
That cycle that you mentioned is so, so important. I think we're taught, probably brainwashed from an early age to think and live in this linear fashion of progress, that we're going to go from this and then we're going to gain these skills and get to that. And then we're going to achieve this and then we'll have that. I guess the word that comes to mind is a false premise that we are going to get to a final destination rather than that everything we're doing along the way is the creation of life, is the living of life, that it's not, well, we get to that final destination and then we get to have whatever the riches, the feelings of worthiness, whatever they are. And certainly in Western culture, that's been the lie, I think, told and taught to so many of us, that once we get there, then we get to have XYZ, rather than really being able to live in and know and understand that we are all of those perfect, beautiful, wabi-sabi concepts of imperfection, of incompleteness, that it is a cyclical nature. We're always going to be living within that. That's just beautiful.
Yes, because I always feel like it's important for people to reflect on. And so, people that are listening, I would love them to try this as well. Where in your life is this popping up where perhaps you're seeking perfection? I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I think this was very strong for me. I was very focused on, career progression and working hard. And I would work so hard towards a promotion that I really thought I wanted. And then I would get that, and then somehow, you don't really feel anything. And then you're actually just being like, okay, great. Now I need to get promoted again, or I need to make more money so that I could feel worthy. And it's actually a never ending cycle that I feel like is an empty pursuit. And I do think that a lot of people are caught up in this cycle. And I always think that awareness is the first step. So asking yourself these questions and reflecting on it is going to be the path for us to break free from that cycle. But unfortunately, I do think a lot of us are being brainwashed or told that this is our way of succeeding or feeling happy in life, but that's not necessarily true.
What was it for you that broke you free of that path? Corporate perfectionism. I know that you also struggled with an eating disorder. Those are some heavy duty things, programs and conventional perfectionism, people pleasing kind of things. What broke you free of that?
I was 23 and I was just starting off my career, and I was in Toronto. I was probably the fittest I've ever been. So I did have various types of eating disorders. And so at that point, I was just under eating and over exercising. So I was exercising maybe 2, 3 hours a day, and I was not eating enough. And so I was very thin and fit. So in many ways, I looked physically the best I have ever been. And I was in a job and career that I was successful in. I was financially in a good spot. So I was ticking all these labels that I thought society has told me. So I was like, okay, looking great, nice. I'm living in a nice place by myself. I'm on the 47th floor in Toronto in like a really nice area. I'm making a good amount of money. And I sat with myself, and I have never felt more empty. And I remember this feeling where I was starving, but I didn't want to eat. And it was 10 a.m. I was lying on the floor of my apartment, and I just couldn't, shake this feeling that I was like, I really, if this is what life is about, then it's not fit for me. I just can't, I don't think that this is the solution.
Mhm.
And, in a way, I really had to hit rock bottom where I felt completely empty. And I will say, at that point, I said, okay, if there is another way, I have to explore this, because living like this is not sustainable for me. And so that was really the journey where I started looking into what is it if I took care of myself beyond the physical. And so I started looking into holistic well being. And that really led me down the path of understanding, okay, what if I took care of myself, mind, body, and soul? What does that look like? And I will say the journey really started with taking a look of the hard things. I always feel like healing sometimes is not the easiest, but I do think it's important to look into what was driving some of these unhealthy habits of perfectionism, of being so strict to myself. And for me, it was trying to understand that I can love myself for who I am. And it's not about me being perfect that ties me into me being worthy. That's actually not true. And so it's about, okay, how can I understand being authentic? And this Wabi Sabi framework really helped me as well, because it really helped unlock some of these blocks that I think were driving some of that behavior.
Yeah, that rock bottom moment is very common to send us within, to be that catalyst for that inner journey and inner exploration. And we can thank it for that, right? It's so incredible that if you get the gift of a rock bottom, then, to be able to see it as that, I think is amazing. And so many of us start our journeys from that place, from that, as you said, emptiness, a place of the void. And so going from that void, starting to explore the darker recesses of the void, right? Where you're like, well, okay, what's down here? And then you discover all of these things, of these places of healing, right? These places that need healing, that need nurturing, that need attention, that need love. I know it's not one of your main principles, but this brings to mind kintsugi for me, of where there's that beautiful practice of making something even more beautiful in the repair of it. Is that something that you reflected on, or that was brought into your own healing journey?
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that your point about rock bottom is such a gift in a way. And I think it takes a long time to get there. So like if someone's hitting rock bottom and they're saying, okay, I don't feel like this is a gift for me, please know that I definitely felt that as well.
Absolutely. It does not feel like that immediately, but it becomes that once you get to that point of reflection, right?
Yes, because I remember a key learning for me was that I was not good at reaching out to my community in a way that was vulnerable. Where, for example, in the past, I would be in romantic relationships and I thought I had to be the perfect partner. And so I showed no signs of weakness, and I thought that I had to do XYZ to be what I thought was a good partner. But in a way, I think I realize now that the relationship I'm in now is so much more healthier because I actually don't feel this constant anxiety that I felt back in the day when I thought I had to be perfect and I had to say some things. So I do think that what I learned from this journey has helped me shine in the most authentic way. And even the work that I do now, I feel like because I've been through that journey myself, I'm able to connect with people. I'm also able to align my authentic self with my work, which I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't really hit that rock bottom to understand what it is that I wanted to do.
And that's the most beautiful thing, that us spiritual warriors, I like to call us, because it is a battle. This battle with not the true self. It's a battle with the old self, the programmed self, the ego self, the self, and that the wounded self. And we battle with ourselves to kind of come through with our truth and come through with that authenticity. And in it, and in that spiritual battle, we get to experience the beautiful outcome that, yes, someone listening now who might be either having just hit the rock bottom or going towards it at like a speeding train, and they feel it's happening. To your point, absolutely know that it's not going to necessarily feel like a gift right away, but that through the just path of discovery, like you were just talking about, of understanding and really finding that true self within, you then get to see that in retrospect, that if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be here in this moment, in this now. And you could see that too, of even if I hadn't done all those things to hit that rock bottom, I also wouldn't have hit that to get to past that, right? So all of it truly is part of the journey. It's all part of the journey. So it's not like you just enter the spiritual journey once you realize that you are in it. We're always in it. It's just whether we awake to it or not and are aware. So I love what you said earlier about that awareness piece of becoming aware, maybe through something that catalyzes you, like a rock bottom moment, but then stoking that awareness through these principles, like you said, choosing your space very carefully, choosing what you put in your body, choosing what you surround yourself with, where you focus your mind. All of those things are choices, aren't they, that can impact the continued awareness or not, because we could go back to sleep so easily.
That's true. Yes. The theme that we're focusing on at Mogami this month is kotodama. And I don't know if you know this word, but kotodama is this Japanese concept that is essentially saying that our words have spirit to them. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, not only in what we say, which is very important, but what are we hearing as well? What are we reading? What are we seeing? What are we filling our space with in terms of words? Because I think this is a really important reminder that I've been practicing myself, because not only is it important to reflect on the words that we're saying, because they do have spirit, they do have energy that I feel like we need to be mindful of, but also, who are we surrounding ourselves with? Are they speaking words that align with who you want to be, with the energy that you want to feel? And also, it's not just speaking, it's also what you're reading, what you're writing. I think these are all important things that we need to pay attention to, because they do really fill up our space in ways that our spirit really, I think we need to pay attention to.
It's so true about words having power, words being spells, words being their own entities. And I say this about everything, really, as far as us living here in this plane, I see it as all energy, that we are all energy, and as is everything that's here, that exists here. So the words, the sounds of those words, the words in writing, all of it carries an energy, and it is then therefore its own energy. Well, I mean, we could imbue it, I suppose, with our energy as we speak something, but it also has its own, right? It's its own entity in that sense that we're then interacting with. And I know you're a calligrapher, Japanese calligrapher. How does that work in that beautiful art form of working with the energy of that word or phrase as you draw? I would imagine you're like kind of playing with the words as you are creating, well, not, you're not creating them, but you are kind of giving them a form on that piece of paper. That to me just seems so beautiful.
In Japanese, we say it's shodo, is how we say Japanese calligraphy. And you could translate that to sho is writing, and do is the word for journey. Japanese calligraphy is the way of writing because it is a journey, and it's rooted in over 2,000 years of history. And it's said to be one of the three traditional arts that help us guide us through life's journey. So I've done calligraphy now for about over 25 years. And I actually have my mom to thank because she really wanted me to stay close to my culture. So she did calligraphy, so she wanted us to do it as a child. So I'm so grateful for that. In calligraphy, it's considered a moving meditation. And there's this idea that we want to be in a state called mushin, which is translates to mind of no mind. So it's a state where you're free of all thoughts, all assumptions, and you're completely present. And so perhaps you've heard of flow state. I think it's a little bit similar to that. But what's interesting is that in calligraphy, we know that if you think about being in mushin, you're not in mushin.
Right. There's that mind at work.
Exactly, exactly. So we understand that. So in calligraphy, we understand that this is the state that we want to achieve, but we're going to forget about it actually. And we're going to focus on our hand and the movement that you're writing. That's going to help guide us get there. So in calligraphy, when you're writing a new piece, for example, like you want to first practice the stroke order. There is an order to how we write our characters. So sometimes you find that your mind is thinking a lot, but I think the beauty of it is through repetition, through being in the moment and working with your brush, you could find that flow state and you could really connect with your writing. There's a saying in Japanese calligraphy that your writing never lies. I will say I wrote a piece and I look at it initially and I really don't like it. And it's interesting because I hear this inner dialogue saying, gosh, the stroke here is not in balance. You're probably not focused or you went too thick in this push. Like, I hear a lot of inner chatter that's happening like right after the piece. But we always say, take a step back and look at your piece tomorrow. And then you see it. And I will say some of my favorite pieces that I've ever written were the ones that I first really didn't like. And it's quite interesting because you're seeing the same piece that you've written, but you're seeing it in a different way. And so I think in a way, our writing can be a source of truth when our minds can try to confuse us.
So it being your authenticity, right? You get to actually see something that was produced from hopefully the no mind state as much as possible, but from your truth, the flow, from that inner self guidance of where you're actually then able to see it. That to me is also a beautiful part of the art form, and that you can reflect on it after forever and probably see so much in that about yourself as you just observe it and be with it. I love that. You brought in something totally new to the podcast. We've talked about writing on this podcast a lot, journaling and free flow writing and allowing, spirit to guide your hand and just getting into a flow state with writing. We've talked to many authors who've written books that way, channeled books this way of just getting into that flow. So we've definitely covered writing, but this is another layer of that, of not just writing words, but bringing to life these forms, bringing to life maybe something that in and of itself, once you have the piece, as you call it, done, that it will inform further meditation or inform your life through that interaction with it. Is that how you feel about it?
Yes, and there's many beautiful practices within calligraphy that I think really tie into your points. So at the beginning of the year, there is this writing practice called kakizome, and kakizome translates to your first writing. And we want to do this within the first 2 weeks of the year, but we want to write your intention of the year. What's really important about this is that we write it and then we want to make sure that we could see it. So it's a visible reminder. I have wine downstairs in terms of what I wrote this year, and I look at it every day. And in a way, it's always reminding me of my writing, but also my intention and also what I felt at that time. And so it is a way to connect with yourself, with your authentic self. It's also a way to connect with your soul and what's inside because it is an expression of your soul. And I think it's a beautiful way to connect with yourself every day because it is hard. I think it's in this world that we live in, genuinely think I understand. So we have so much stimulus, we have so much things to do that it is difficult to think about ourselves or what we want or what our inner soul is wanting. And so I think we have to make sure that we make these practices so that we don't forget about ourselves because we it is challenging, but we can do it if we just need to have those reminders every day.
Yes, and reminders to the audience right now of what you're saying is that meditation doesn't have to be just sitting on a mat and closing your eyes and chanting Om and what people often perceive of as meditation. Meditation can be moving this way through calligraphy. It can be moving in nature and just walking. And these moving meditations are absolutely as valid. They're not just like, oh yeah, start there until you get into real meditation. It's not that. They are all valid ways of getting into that no mind state, getting into that flow state, really just aligning with our soul and on source. And however we can do that, that's valid. And I love that you brought this into the podcast because, like I said, it's not been discussed before of using a craft like a calligraphy to meditate. But for anybody who, because so many people do say, can't meditate. And that's just a common refrain. Oh, I can't meditate, therefore I'm not going to, and F that thing. Instead of understanding that there are so many ways to meditate. And I hope anyone listening to this now who feels that way of like, oh, I can't meditate in that traditional way of sitting, closing the eyes and being still, that there are these ways to meditate. And even if you don't know how to write Japanese characters, you could do something similar. You could write in English or your language and kind of mimic the form, even do something similar. Or, like I said, walking in nature. And I know that's one of the principles that Mogami utilizes within your wellness principles of the forest bathing that is tied to Japanese culture, certainly, but not owned by the Japanese people in any way. We can all just be in the forest. And it feels so amazing to be in nature. It is the one thing that I think is mentioned in every single one of my podcast episodes of
Mm,
how people connect to their soul and to connect to God is through nature. And I know that through shinrin-yoku, is that how you pronounce it?
yes, yes, Shini.
So through forest bathing being one of these strong principles of getting into nature, I would imagine one for that meditation, but what else for? What else is within that practice that is so beneficial for us? In words, because I think we can all feel it. But yeah, can you explain that a little more?
Yes, and I will say I 100%, I think Japan coined the term shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing, but I honestly think like this is probably the most like universal like practice that I feel like almost everyone will agree with you that spending time in nature is rejuvenating. And I think shinrin-yoku, like there were studies that supports that, which I feel like is why it's picking up in the wellness industry. But to your point about how it helps us, I mean, when we think about forest bathing, I do think sometimes your point about some people say they don't have access to a forest or they don't have access to a fully immersive experience in nature. And if we really look into the practice of shinrin-yoku, it is simply to be mindful and spend time in nature through our body's senses. So I think this is a really great way to go home back to our bodies because when we think about our everyday life right now, I think a lot of times we have desk jobs. We're on our computers every day and we're not really connecting with our bodies as we did before. But the practice of shinrin-yoku is really when we're spending time in nature. It could honestly be outside of your local park. It could be really just if you walk out in the river, if you see some trees, that could be considered shinrin-yoku, as long as we are paying attention to our five senses. So what are we smelling when we're outside? Can we touch some of the trees? How does it feel? We could do some grounding exercises where we take our shoes off and we walk on the ground. And how does that feel? What do we see? When we start paying attention to the actual all the colors that each flower has, it's actually super fascinating and it's a way to come home to ourselves, which I think we don't really get to do. And by doing that, of course, there are some physiological benefits, but I do think it is in a greater sense, just coming back to ourselves, which I feel like we don't do enough.
Oh, yeah. That is again another one of the brainwashing programming techniques going on these days of removing ourselves from what we truly are, which is this natural being. Essentially, if we're going to look at Earth as what it is, I mean, we're another animal here. Yes, we have a consciousness that may differ from other animals, but we are flesh, bones, blood coursing through our veins. We've got all of the same parts. And so to remove us from the nature of who and what we are, it creates that schism that really is uncomfortable. People feel it. You feel that. And I think it leads to that void and that emptiness that you talked about earlier. So just getting into nature, or like you said, just touch a tree, put your feet on the grass instead of in your shoes and You could literally have one tree. It doesn't have to be a forest, right? You could just have one that you spend some time with and touch and smell and look at. We're at the time of this recording, it's spring, and it's so beautiful to watch that progression right now of what's going on with the trees. And you see what was once a flower now turning into these leaves, and the color changes and the texture changes. I mean, you could literally just look at 1 inch of a tree and just watch the cycle of that throughout the year and be immersed in all of this.
Yes, I love this point because some of my clients, I don't have the time or I don't have a forest where I feel like we can make a lot of these reasons why we can't practice these simple things. But honestly, I would say like take 5 minutes and go outside, find your closest tree and just stare at it, and you will be amazed. It's so fascinating. And I also love that it's accessible. You don't need like 200 pounds to go see a tree. It's right outside. I think this is like a really beautiful gift that nature has given us to connect with ourselves. And then also, in a way, I think by appreciating the nature, it also reminds us that we have to take care of it.
Yeah. And it's taking care of ourselves then, which is really the I think the thing that comes out of being on a spiritual journey is that you finally realize that you're part of the one, that we are no different. And then where there is no separation between you and I, between us and our desk, between us and the animals, and certainly with the other natural elements, we are one with it. And once we truly come into that understanding and that acceptance or that knowing, it's like none of the things that we sought before seem to matter as much, or none of the problems that we thought we had seem to matter as much, right? All of those things seem trivial to the fact that we're this being interwoven in all of this incredible miracle that we exist in. And getting to that point is, I think, the point of a spiritual journey, rather than we're on the spiritual journey to ascend to heaven or nirvana or some off planet to another planet, right? We're, I believe, on this spiritual journey to come home to that of who we really are, and to then be able to really experience heaven on earth, that we get to live into this incredible life that we have here to live into. But it does require a lot of that turning off of, as you mentioned earlier, not listening to those words that are going to pull you out of this truth, or at least this vibe that you're in, that we're focusing on spending this time with nature. We are nature too, but when we get to be in those more natural environments, we get to resonate with it, right? We're like, "Ooh, hi friend, hi friend." Like, it enlivens that in us, right?
I felt like that's the gift of the spiritual journey, is that we are able to be present. And, I think sometimes it's difficult to understand what that means or grasp. We often say, like, you want to be in the now. But I have some people say, what does that mean? Or how do you get there? Or the benefit of that? But I think everything that you explained so beautifully is the gift, because in many ways people have different ideas about what happens after our time here on earth is done. But I think for me personally, I will never know the answer to that. I think the goal of a spiritual journey is to understand the preciousness of our time, but also through these practices be able to be present, so we don't miss these moments that will fly by, so that we could fully experience through all of our senses, and through all of our emotions even. And so we could really be present and make the most of the time that we have here.
Yes, we talked about presence before we hit record, and you were sharing how you're somebody who doesn't have the best memory. You didn't say it that way, but that you can kind of get lost in the city and not remember where you were, how you got from A to B. And I can be absent-minded in that sense too, of where sometimes seems like I'm unaware of surroundings, but it's almost like being aware of it from a different place. being aware of it from that still point place or from that now moment, not like where was I just 5 minutes ago, but oh, where I am is right now. So what a gift, whether or not you cultivated that gift through your practices or that's always been your way. I don't know. It's a gift no matter how you slice it.
That's true. It's probably a little bit of both. I do think it's great when you have that sense of it's almost as if it's your first time. I think that having that childlike curiosity is something that I actually really try to not forget because it makes life so enjoyable when you're experiencing things in the now and not getting so caught up in the mind. And I think that's something that I really try to practice because I think we all have busy minds. How can we make peace with it? But then also use these tools like forest bathing where we practice. And then also when we go to places, yes, absolutely. I think sometimes I've been there like 5 times, but I honestly feel like it's my first time.
You're like all giddy and in awe, and it's great. I love it. Well, this brings us beautifully to Ikigai because one of those principles within Ikigai is that focus on those little things, right? And those little things bringing you joy and being able to actually be present with that, I think is, and I want you to flesh this out for us, but I think that's such a beautiful aspect of Ikigai. And a lot of people in the West have heard of Ikigai, but I think you're going to help us to dispel some of those myths around what they may have experienced of it, which is a bit of a bastardization of the concept. So let's clear that up right here and now of where did it go wrong or awry for most people who understand or even have heard of this concept here in the West? And then what is it truly?
So, Ikigai is probably most well known as the Ikigai Venn diagram. It's saying that your life's purpose is the intersection between what the world needs, what you get paid for, what you enjoy doing, and what you get paid for. And it's quite interesting because if we do a little bit of research, we'll find that there was a British blogger named Mark Quinn who watched a TED Talk that was talking about Ikigai being a key contributor to longevity. And he watched that TED Talk and he repurposed a different purpose Venn diagram that was created by a Spanish astrologer named Andrew Susunaga, completely irrespective of Ikigai, but it was just actually purpose. And so he changed the word purpose to Ikigai. And then he wrote a blog post about it. And the rest is history, as we say.
That was enough for it to just snowball into wow.
Yes. And in a way, I mean, first and foremost, it's okay if you use the Venn diagram. It is most commonly used in a lot of coaching. I mean, I love frameworks, but if you want to know the real meaning of Ikigai, like that is not the Venn diagram. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about the histories. And so now the right question would be, how do we define Ikigai? So Ikigai is the combination of two words. So there's Iki and Gai. The way I describe Ikigai is let's look at the source, and the source is the word itself. And Iki refers to life, and Gai means reason for being. So Ikigai is your reason for being. But the beauty is in the details, where if we look at Iki, the word, it refers to a lot of daily action, so your daily life. And it also recognizes that our life here is limited. So it's referring to this specific lifetime. And then Gai, which is your reason for being. One, it refers to things that are action oriented. And I think this is beautiful because it's telling us that your reason for being should help you take action. And then the second point is that you hope that the results will be worth it.
Yeah. That's the part that kind of got pulled out into Western thought, right? They're like, ooh, worth it. That means you're making lots of money or that it's of value to other people. And I think even within what I know of the concept, there doesn't really even need to be value to other people
Yes,
in it.
yes, yes. I'm so glad you pointed that out because when I see the Venn diagram, the part that I worry about is a lot of it is external labels. And these are things that are sometimes out of your control. And what we're saying about Ikigai, what I hopefully, people understood is that it's really internal driven, and it's really about what sparks you joy in every day. And it has nothing to do with what you get paid for example, or what the world needs. It's a lot to do with more those small everyday moments. What actions can you take that spark joy that you believe to be your reason for being?
A lot of people obviously have different definitions of the word purpose or what the meaning of purpose for them. So I can see how that could be conflated with purpose. Oh, well, there's our why right there, our reason for being. So I can see how those things could have gotten, mashed together. But as you said, it's in the details. So in the details of not just that word purpose or a concept of purpose, but in the action of it and in the living of it and the interplay of what that means in your everyday life, which is why I love the concept so much, because in the everyday mystic ethos, it's how do we weave in these aspects of whether it's purpose or love or our connection to source and to who we are as our true nature, and meditation, all the tools and practices as well as the concepts. How are those woven into our everyday? It's not a pursuit so much as a way of being, a way of living. And to me, that's Ikigai. It is your way of living. Or if you choose to live in this way of where you are finding purpose in those moments and you are finding that joy in all those small things. And then you're discovering who you are through it, right? Through those pursuits, but it isn't just a one thing. It's a discovery process.
That's so true. And in the Japanese context, you could have many ikigai. It could change over time. And I think it hits on exactly your points about your purpose. Sometimes I could feel can seem like this grand pursuit. And I think Ikigai actually reminds us to go back to the everyday and find those moments every day where your purpose is aligned with what you're doing in the everyday. And it's also about accepting that you're evolving, you're changing, but it is important to always have that as an important reminder that you want to have an ikigai, and everyone has the right to have a ikigai in us as well. So I want everyone to make sure that they think that they're worthy of it, because they absolutely are. And let's try to think about those everyday things that can give you that sense of ikigai.
What are a few things that someone could do to help discover what that is for themselves?
Spend some time, it could be 5 minutes, to just think back to the moments, the past couple of months that really brought you joy. And I think leaning in on this emotion is really important, because it's not really external facing, but it's where you're having that sense of joy, where you're having that sense of ease. And write those moments down, because we also just talked about how, our words have spirit. So let's bring those to the surface. And then I think after we do that, these are clues of what your ikigai is, what your soul is trying to tell you. And then from there, we could really take it further. You could work with a coach, you could talk to your friend, you could start having these conversations about your ikigai moments, is what I like to call them. Who were you with? What was it that really made it your feeling of purpose or your reason for being? And then trying to understand how we could bring more of that into your life through various means. We talked about those tools that you mentioned: meditation, mindfulness. How can we create a lifestyle that really aligns with these ikigai moments? I think that's the best way that we could get started.
That's beautiful. And it can be woven into your work and the value that you're creating in the world, right? It's not that it can't be brought back into those things, but it isn't defined by those things. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
I absolutely agree. And I think that's why it's really important to start with that practice, what I just mentioned, because you're starting with you. You're not starting with your professional job or those external labels. We could bring those ikigai moments, those ikigai components and then bring it to our professional job, because it is true that as adults we spend the majority of our time working in some capacity. So I do think it's important that we try to weave in what we find, and it is possible and important to do. So I completely agree with you.
I'm so happy that we got to spend this time together and that the audience got to hear more about these really rich and complex concepts. We've just touched on the surface of these things. I'm going to have the links to your website, and I want people to be able to connect to you and then obviously go deeper on these concepts with you and your company, because this world, this life, this journey that we're living isn't just a one-shot deal here or there. It's a constant state of unfolding and exploration. And so if any of the things that you heard on today's episode struck your heart, opened it up a little bit, excited it, brought that little sense of joy, then go deeper with it. That's an invitation to go to the Mogami Wellness website, to connect to Saori, to connect to this wisdom that is complex to the point of where you could study it or immerse yourself in it for the rest of your lifetime, even just one of these concepts, right? Or take what you want from it, take what you seek from it, and then move on. But an invitation certainly to explore these concepts deeper. Before we leave today, is there anything that you want to share with the audience, whether it's how they can connect to you or what they might do first? Like, what's a good starter point for people?
I think the most important thing is what you mentioned, is you do what feels right for you. If it is to take this piece of wisdom that you had from our conversation and take it into action, if it is working closer with you, Carissa, in terms of your work, if it is you're called to look in more into Mogami's resources, I think all of those options are work. And I think what's important is I just hope that everyone pays attention to that voice inside and takes action in a way that best aligns with your soul.